Party rock is in the house tonight. Everybody just have a...
Alright, so the first question we've got for you is, what motivated you to run for board this year?
Okay, cool. I think I was motivated to run for board because I'm really passionate about the opportunities the union offers to offer progressive change to all students and to provide services to students and improve their lives. So I was motivated to run for board because I think that I can be the person to do those things.
And can you tell me who your campaign manager is?
Yeah, I have two campaign managers, Oliver Plunkett and Alice Strauss.
So on that note, are you aligned with a political party?
Yeah, so I'm a member of the Labor Party and I'm also a member of Young Labor Left, and I'm very proud to say both those things. So yeah.
Great. And how long have you been a member of Labor Left?
So I've been a member of the Labor Party for a long time, since I was a teen, and I've officially been a member of my Labor Left faction for about a month, but I've always been aligned with those left values.
So you were a member before you decided to run for union board?
I wasn't a member of Sydney Labor Students specifically before I had started thinking about running, but when I joined, that was kind of like the clinching moment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so which of the other candidates do you share political preferences with?
In terms of like political
Views,
ideals,
though.
yeah. So I think that Jack Whitney, being another Labor Left candidate, he and I would be the closest in political ideas, but all of the Labor candidates, so Atia and George also, we would be sharing values, yeah.
Great. And on the other hand, which candidate do you think you share the least in common with politically?
I would probably say Jen Zinn or Cara Green, because I know they're both a bit involved in the Liberal Party, so yeah.
Yeah, we're going to hear that today. Just before we go on that, do you feel like affiliation with a party, like it's obviously an enabling force in these elections, there's no two ways about it. Does it stop you, is there anything that you would like to do that you feel you can't do because of your party affiliation?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question, but I think that in my case particularly, that's really not the case. I share, like, very, very closely, I share the values of Sydney Labor Students and the Labor Left, so there's nothing that I want to do that they don't also want to do. Like, I'm not prohibited in any way, so yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So what do you think differentiates you from the rest of the candidates this year? There's a big bunch.
Yeah, there's 13 of us, so
Yeah.
there's a lot. I think that my experience is the main thing that differentiates me from other people. So I was the USU Women's Events Coordinator last semester. So basically, through that role, I gained a lot of experience with the union, working with the union, and I learned the skills of how to get things done within the organisation, and I think that's something that not a lot of other candidates can say. So that's probably the main thing that differentiates me.
Great. That sounds good. So this is a question we've been asking everyone. I imagine we will ask everyone. If you're elected, who would you vote for the president of the USU?
So I think that is a decision which I haven't like fully kind of made my mind up on that.
Okay.
I think what I would need to do is speak to all the people who could be elected to that position,
Sure.
get a better view of like what their point of view is, and then I would make a decision after that.
Sure.
So yeah.
Okay. And in the hypothetical situation that you do get up, a lot of students last year said in these interviews that they were only held that they wouldn't seek the votes of Senate-appointed board directors whether they run for executive, and yet have, it's ostensibly seen to be trying to get those votes. Can you say conclusively that you would or wouldn't seek those votes were you to run for executive next year?
I mean, I think that is quite a long way off. That's about 12 months off. So
the principle is more
yeah.
though, do you think that it's what do you think the role of Senate-appointed directors are?
Yeah.
Their capacity?
Yeah, so I can answer that question. I
Sure.
think that the board really should be a student board, and the students should have the strongest voices in the board. So in that sense, yeah, I think the focus and the power should really be gravitating towards the students on the board because they're the people who are elected by the students of the university.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, not necessarily with specific reference to what happened to Tom Rowan, but under what circumstances would you consider it appropriate to breach your duty to the board for the greater good?
Yeah, so I think in those situations, there are situations where that would be appropriate, but it has to be a situation where there is an extremely pressing ethical imperative that would need to override your legal obligations. So it would really have to be something where the welfare of students is at stake if you do not divulge the information or do whatever the thing is. So yeah.
Okay.
And how would you have moved in the case of Tom Rao? Because I mean,
Yeah.
like I don't think it's really contestable that the welfare of some students was was jeopardised. If you
Yeah.
share what he did, how do you think you would have acted had you been on board at the same
Yeah.
time as Tom?
So it is hard to say.
Mm.
So yeah, sorry, are you asking if I was
If
Tom?
you had been,
Yeah, and that if I had been put in the situation that he was in, I think I would have divulged that information because it not only was about that situation, but I think it revealed a lot of issues with the university in general, dealing with students who were protesting the reforms of the government at the time. So I think I would have acted in a similar way to him.
Cool. I don't want to take the answer for granted, so I'll ask a question that may seem very obvious, but if you had been a board member at the same time as Tom Rowry, would you have moved to censure him as they did?
No, I wouldn't have censured him,
Okay. Just wanted to speak to the implementation of some of your primary policies. You talk about wanting to make the union more accessible. There's a particular emphasis on access for low SES students. What do you think of what's been done so far, and how would you like to see that taken further?
Yeah, so I was really excited and I'm proud to see the measures that the board undertook, extending free access to students on E12 scholarships, but I think it doesn't go far enough. So the metric that we would use is a university's metric for low socioeconomic status. It's about 10% of students. So it would be around 4,500 students, I believe, that would be eligible for this. And basically, that is kind of the way we would go about it. I think that that's a good measure because it's something that is... so I think issues were brought up at the time of the discussion is like, well, if the board is deciding who can get these, disadvantaged student access cards, there's a bit of a confidentiality issue. So I think we get around that by using an established system used by the university. So yeah.
Sure. Cool. It's a lot of students. 10%.
Yeah.
I understand the rationale for the metric. How would you budget for that?
Yeah, so we've done a costing. The outright cost would be $40,000 to the union. That is really quite insignificant considering the $22 million budget. And then in terms of hidden costs, I guess is the best way to describe it, would cost about $250,000. So that's still not, in my mind, too much money. I think that is definitely a good use of resources because the Access program has been very influential in making me the person that I am today in terms of clubs and societies and stuff like that. I think most students say the same who have been involved in it, so I think the most vulnerable students really deserve a chance to get involved like everyone else.
Sure. Let me know if you want me to stick to the ones on the sheet, but I think the impulse is great, the intention, the gesture is very important. I know that so many institutions on campus, and I count Honi among them, privilege is like almost inextricably tied to them. If you don't have the means to have like leisure time, if you aren't well supported either out of home or still at home, it's very difficult to make the most of a lot of the opportunities that the union offers. Do you think that offering free access is enough of an obstacle removed to truly promote accessibility within the union? Yeah,
I definitely think that it removes a significant obstacle. It removes, in my mind, the most significant obstacle. So basically, like, if you don't have an access card, it's kind of like, too bad. Like, that's the end of the story for you if you can't get the card.
Sure.
So it's removing the most significant obstacle to participation. I think, of course, there's more things that can be done. As a student, I am able to live at home, which I'm really grateful, but I live quite far away in the suburbs. So I completely know the feeling of just logistically it being very difficult to join in with things that the union offers. But I think that this is really like a strong step in the right direction in terms of that.
Sure.
So we might move on to other policies. Making our way down the list, one of your second policy here is you want to make sure that all USU clothing is fair trade certified, so there's no sweatshops and no supply chain. Can you explain the policy and tell me how you'd go about implementing it?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, sweatshop labour is used in parts of the USU supply chain, and that's quite unethical and it's not nice. So basically the way we would go about it is just like some coffee vendors and that kind of thing are fair trade certified, like the place you buy the coffee from, we would stipulate that we will only buy USU merchandise from places that are fair trade certified. And so there's companies out there that do that, and we would contact them and have the supply moved over from the current suppliers to those new suppliers that are fair trade.
Great, and I agree, it sounds very important. The thing though that's often discussed, particularly with regards to these campaigns, is those Gildan shirts that you're wearing and the rest of the candidates are wearing are all are made in sweatshops.
Yeah.
If so, would that be first on your list? Would you
in
be
terms of
accountable in terms of
doing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I'm very, very eager to do. It would definitely be like one of the first things that I would be pursuing. I obviously understand that in kind of like this modern capitalist society, it's very hard to live like completely ethically. That's probably not possible, but I think we can do as much as we can as an organisation to alleviate that.
Great. Okay, that's a good answer. I think we'll come back to policies later on. You emphasised that you've obviously spent a lot of time in the CNS program. Would you consider that the most important USU area of spending, and if so, why?
I do think the CNS program is very important because it is the main way that most students are receiving contact with the USU, and it's something that gives students tangible skills that they can take out into the workforce or take out into the rest of their lives.
Yep.
So I do think it's very important. I guess it can be hard to prioritise exactly like this is my hierarchy of important to least important programs.
Sure.
The USU does, because I think that it does a lot of things which are very helpful to students and very important, but it is one that I value very highly.
Were you forced to? Where would you cut from the USU's budget? Which program would be first on the chopping block?
Yeah, so I think if it was necessary, I would be cutting from the capital works budget. So say something like Courtyard. I mean, I love going to Courtyard. Most people do, and it is a big money maker for the USU, which I think is really great. But projects like that are very expensive, and we can use that money for things that directly benefit students, as opposed to things that maybe like an ancillary benefit later down the road.
Great. So we're moving on to the current board. What do you think the greatest policy achievements have been thus far?
So this is quite a small thing, but the FPOS, no limits on USU places, it's something that just improves like the daily life of a lot of students. So that's something that I really liked. I also liked the We Are Women booklet that they put out last year. I thought that was really positive. Also Bibi D'Souza's Rad Sex and Consent Day, I thought was a really amazing, and I just found so many different groups on campus coming together for that, so I really thought that was a great policy as well. And also some of the measures that they've got to increase accountability of the board, so like publishing the minutes online, and there's been discussion about making it more possible for students to speak at those board meetings, like on specific issues which pertain to them, so I think those things are really positive as well.
Great. So I guess the other side again is what do you think the greatest failure of the current board has been?
So I think probably the biggest, failure might be a strong word, but the biggest issue with the board is lack of follow through on things were promised during the campaign. And I understand that, of course, if you get on the board, you then have to negotiate with everyone else that got on the board to put through your policies. But just things like coming up, like I remember last year a couple of candidates were promising like mulled wine at Herman's, and that's just something that didn't happen. I know Tara promised like a USU cinema space, which didn't end up happening, and I don't think that's necessarily an indictment of them as board directors or as leaders, because I think the board has overall done a good job. But and this is just a problem in general, I think, for the board in all time, but promises need a bit more follow through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I jump on that for a second?
Okay.
There are a lot of like presumed necessary evils in running campaigns like this, and I think to a degree promises like that almost fall into that basket.
Yeah.
Did you want to speak to that? Because like your policy statement, like it seems to be like, I don't know, not as, this will be one of those bits that we trim down for the sake of the viewers. It looks at, there's ideology behind it. It doesn't seem like there's anything tokenistic to like get people over the line per se. Do you want to speak to that in relation to your campaign strategy more broadly, if it has a place in it?
Yeah, so I call those kind of policies Coke in the Bubbles policies. So it's things that like we want, but we probably won't end up getting. It was very important to me that I didn't have any policies like that in my policy statement. So I've only pitched policies which I think I'm committed to putting through. Am I elected to the board? And yeah, that's it. I think it's really important. I think that students become disillusioned with the board because they do so much for the student body here, but there is a disconnect sometimes between what they say they're going to do and what ends up happening. And I think that just turns people away from an organisation which has the power to do a lot for students. So I think that it was really important to only pitch things which I know I can follow through on.
Cool.
On that note, you still do have quite a few policies there that are all relatively substantial. Would you consider there to be any hierarchy within it? Is there anything that's the highest priority?
Yeah, so I mean, I am very keen to do all of them, but the two which I probably am most passionate about is the fair trade, like we talked about before, and also the drink safe technologies policy. And I think especially the drink safe one, that is actually relatively easy to implement. So it's something that could be done really quickly and would just be in place as soon as possible.
Cool.
It's a cool step.
You actually had another policy which was about inequality. Can you explain that and how that'll be different from other union-run festivals that already exist throughout the year?
Yeah, so I think the emphasis in Equality Week would really be on peer education between students. So when I was USU Women's Events Coordinator, I found that the best way to run events and the best way to get people involved was just to simply ask people to lend their expertise, lend their time, and help out with the events. So we would approach groups on campus who are already involved with equality and promoting equality, like for example, I don't know, Shades or the Queer Collective, Women's Collective, that kind of thing, and them along with community leaders and educators, basically run events and workshops and make it fun as well, but give people an opportunity to maybe learn about areas in social justice which they didn't know that much about before, and just kind of make it a productive place where people can learn from each other. And yeah, so I think that's kind of how we want to run that. Yeah.
Great.
This one is barbed. Which institute, like the SRC and the union, both integral to the student experience of the place. Which do you think does more for student welfare, and why?
I think that's a very difficult question. So I think the SRC does a lot for student welfare, maybe on a big picture scale, or like they're working long term on campaigns which are for students in general, so like anti-fee deregulation kind of campaigns, whereas the union does a lot of work for the day-to-day experiences of students and just making their time while they're here easy and fun and improving their day-to-day lives. So it might not necessarily be a case of who's better, but they're just, it's like oranges and apples, like it's a different kind of thing. Yeah. Sure.
And to a similar point, do you think that there is space within the board to have like is there an activist role for the board or within the board at all?
Yeah, I think the union board can play an activist role, and that's certainly within the purview of the union. So if you look at something like Rad Sex and Consent Day, that was certainly an activist thing, which brought a lot of awareness and was like a really positive experience for a lot of students. It had a social justice kind of ideology behind it. That's a really good example of activism that can be undertaken by the board. I also think because the board and the board members have obviously become quite prominent in the university community, they can have an impact on advocacy. So when board members march as a group, say in an anti-fee dereg march, then they are being activists, like as an individual, but they're also representing the board in an activist capacity.
Cool. There's been a push for transparency on the board this year, in particular. Do you think it's appropriate to discuss matters like CEO remuneration in camera?
I think that it actually is appropriate to discuss those things because although it is someone's kind of private salary, like it's student money that is ultimately paying those salaries. So I think students have a right to at least access the information about what that is. So I'm not saying like put it on the front page of Bull, but I am saying like make it publicly available. Yeah.
Sure. So to clarify, you're happy to have it discussed out of camera?
Sorry. Yeah, I just
that's cool.
I'm
that's so fine. It is a clumsily phrased question.
I get what you like. I
Exhausted.
think we like answered it in the spirit of the question. So yeah.
We'll cut you later.
On that note, would you support the full divulgence of all financials and the expenses of board directors, which is obviously relevant in the conversation about cap charges in particular?
Yeah, so actually one of my policies, which is in the full statement, so I'm not sure if it's on that page, is a no blank check policy for board directors. So basically their expenses would have to be divulged, and that would include any cap charge stuff that they use, but also the expenses on their cards and stuff like that. At the moment we just get a kind of bill that says the board director spent X amount of money, but I would like to see it like broken down by board director, not necessarily like, oh, this board director spent $12 on a coffee or whatever, like, but...
Though if they are, that's probably terrifying.
Probably don't do that, but like, who has spent what amount? I think it's really important for students to see where their money's going.
Great. So as for the political side of that scandal, so to speak, do you think the board went far enough into just censoring Carrigan and Major?
Yeah, so I think that was like it was a very difficult situation. But I do think that especially, unfortunately, what Liam Carrigan did, the amount of money involved in that was just such a cross line. And yeah, it's difficult to say exactly how far that should have gone. So from my point of view, there's kind of censuring, and then the next step would be removal from the board.
Sure.
I don't think removing them from the board is appropriate because they have done so much for the community. And I do think that the guidelines about when they were meant to use the cab charge were quite unclear. So, I mean, it's not an excuse, and they definitely did the wrong thing, but
Sure.
removal from the board I think is too far, so censure has to be appropriate in that situation.
Great. Okay, so with what we did last night is we posted on Facebook asking for questions from any readers. We got a decent amount, surprisingly. One that was not specifically to you, but I think would suit you well, is it's an anonymous one. And the question is, what specific ways will you increase international student involvement, seeing as they make up a large yet underrepresented demographic in university leadership factions?
Yeah, so I think that's really important. I've spoken to a lot of international students over the last few days, and I think that they've been echoing that kind of sentiment.
Yeah.
One thing that I would really love to do is increase the International Student Day Trips program. So this already exists, but not many people know about it because it's not publicised very much. And it's
Is that run by the union?
Yeah, it's run by the union, but it's unfortunately not big enough. So basically I'd like to expand it, have more day trips, and also just make that a really big, important part of their orientation here. I would also like to include a couple of trips as part of that program in which local students would be kind of invited and encouraged to go along so that international and local students could actually make strong connections and make friendships. And I think that, yeah, that's kind of my main international student directed policy, though I think a few of the others are things that will help international students as well.
Sure. Sounds good. Can we go to the next question?
Yeah. There are rumours that the USU is looking to get rid of the CNS committee and streamline club and society approval via the board. Do you think the board has a role in politically intervening in the approval of societies, and if so, what is it?
I think in some cases, yes, but not all. So I think that in terms of being a club president, the CNS committee can be sometimes irritating to deal with. However, I think that using the board to approve or disapprove all society applications is probably not a hugely efficient use of time. But I do think that the board does have a role in, well, basically I see the board's role in promoting the welfare of students and the kind of happiness of students. And I think if a society is trying to form which is going to jeopardise that, then the board has a role in addressing that.
Great. Do you have any more questions, Bob?
Actually, I still want to go there.
I don't have any more in there.
Cool. Did you have any questions for us?
Or anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it was a nice interview. Thank you, it was good.
That's good.
Yeah, I just, I think that's pretty much it. You guys are doing a good job with the paper. I enjoy reading it.
Appreciate it. We'll put that in.
Yeah, like Shann's endorsement.
Lovely.
Read Honi Soit. No. But yeah.
That's the only bit we're going to put in. 10-second interview.
Yeah, but yeah, thanks for having me.
No worries.
That's it.
Thanks for coming in.